in a van down by the river.
Hello everybody, I'm trying something new and hopefully the sound quality of this is going to be better than the other videos. Still fairly new at YouTube videos, so it's a live and learn process. Very happy to talk about this coin today. It hits a couple of collecting themes and it also is a well-traveled coin and a nice story behind the pedigree of this coin as well. So I will talk about the coin, the history of the person and the coin, and the story behind it. So this is a coin of the Emperor Vitellius. Vitellius was briefly emperor in 69 AD in the so-called Year of the Four Emperors. This basically kicked off after the fall of Nero in 68 and the governor of Spain, Galba, was selected as emperor. And he, to the surprise of everybody, appointed this Senator Vitellius to command the legions in Germany. And part of the problem was Galba had launched his coup with only 2 legions while there were 8 legions sitting along the Rhine frontier. And they were like, hey, why shouldn't we choose an emperor? And over the reluctance of Vitellius, they proclaimed him emperor, and basically Rome was heading towards its first imperial period civil war. Galba did not live to see this because 2 weeks later he was assassinated by Otho. Otho had been the governor of Lusitania, which is basically modern Portugal. He had been annoyed because Galba had not selected him as his successor, so Otho was pretty unhappy about this. But the rise of Otho did not mean that the civil war is over. So basically you have a showdown between Otho and Vitellius at the Battle of Bedriacum. Otho is defeated, and even though the legions along the Danube and in the east had proclaimed Otho and the Dalmatian legions are on their way, Otho decides, you know what, I'm going to end this civil war and I'm going to fall on my sword. And so Vitellius enters Rome and is proclaimed emperor. The problem, though, of course, is the legions on the Danube and in the east had first supported Galba, and then they had recognized Otho, and they had a general in the wings, Vespasian, who was commanding the armies that were suppressing the Jewish revolt. And very soon after, they were not willing to accept Vitellius, and so the Dalmatian legions continued their march, and there was a second battle at Bedriacum where the Vitellian legions were destroyed. And at this point, Vitellius, who did not really want the throne, opened up negotiations to abdicate. And a deal was worked out because Vespasian's brother, who was a senator, was in Rome, and they worked out a deal, but his supporters would not let him abdicate. The Praetorian Guard saw their comfy gig was up, they wouldn't let him abdicate, and they basically went around lynching Vespasian's supporters, ended up killing his brother, the younger son Domitian barely escaped. So when Vespasian's troops entered Rome, they were in a mood for revenge, and the unfortunate Vitellius, along with his son and brother, were put to death. Vitellius, as he was being dragged and beaten by the soldiers, supposedly cried out, "And yet I too was your emperor." His daughter appears to have been spared. And this ended the Year of the Four Emperors, with Vespasian becoming now sole emperor. And Roman history, if you know about it, there will be a later Year of the Five Emperors, Year of the Six Emperors, a similar type of civil war that was pretty harmful to the empire. So Vitellius fits the morbid collecting theme. He didn't end very well. So let's talk about the coin. The coin itself is a denarius, which is the most common Roman silver piece of the period. It has Vitellius's fleshy portrait. It probably qualifies for my collecting theme of people with giant schnauzes as well, just looking at that portrait. And the reverse has like a sacrificial tripod, which is topped by a dolphin, and there is a raven beneath it. And you have the little legend Vitellius Germanicus Imperator Augustus, because the legions in Germany proclaimed him. He was proclaimed Germanicus, not that he had actually won any victories against the Germans. And as you can notice, the coin is in a slab, and I've been lazy about it. I've just let the coin stay in a slab. Collecting slabs is a controversial subject for ancient coin collectors. It is very common in American coins and modern coins, and it may make sense there because modern slabs do authenticate that it is authentic, and fingerprints are a bigger issue for modern coins. Most ancient collectors do not really like slabs because part of the charm of collecting ancient coins is the ability to hold something that old in your hand. And you really don't learn much about the coins without being able to inspect it in hand. You cannot see the edges, you cannot inspect it. Like, it's different than a machine struck coin where every coin is pretty much the same. No two hand struck coins are identical, and that's often a good marker that it's that is not genuine. Now, while NGC does have very qualified people who look at the coins and they will not knowingly slab a fake coin, there is no guarantee behind it. But I've been lazy, I've not cracked the slab, and so the coin remains there. But just before I move on, there's a comparison what the denarius looks like when you compare it to a quarter of George Washington, and you can just see what this comparison wise looks like. Now, this coin was not always in a plastic coffin. I got this actually from Agora Auctions, run by my friend Alfredo de la Fe, and it was previously on sale in the New York auctions, and these are the two pictures from the actual auction houses. And it was once free. Because this coin actually, and this is where I'm getting into the story about the history of the coin. This coin was in the Nomos auction in 2018, and more on that auction later. And at that point, it was not slabbed, and whoever bought the coin after that at some point stuck it in plastic. Now, the Nomos AG auction is important because it involved the sale of a famous Swiss collection, the Stoecklin collection. So let's talk about the Stoecklin collection. This interest of full disclosure, this token over here is not my token. So I just found it on the internet. I thought it'll add to the presentation a little bit. The Stoecklin collection, it started with a collector called Sebastian Ross, who passed this hobby to his son-in-law, Walter Friedrich Stoecklin, who was a doctor in Serbia during World War I. As you know, Austria and Serbia kicked off World War I, and the Austrians, with German help, eventually captured Serbia. And at this point, Dr. Stoecklin was introduced to the coin collecting hobby, and it appears he's the one who actually acquired this coin. But then he also passed this collection on to his son Walter, who also was a doctor but practiced in Switzerland, who died in 1981. And at some point, this collection was sold by Nomos, probably by the heirs, in about 2018. And every so often you see coins from the Stoecklin collection show up in Nomos. They've been showing up actually even recently. But where did the good doctor get this coin? Because this coin comes from a pedigree, and it was previously sold by an auctioneer by the name of Hamburger. Now, the Hamburger Auctions was a very prominent German auction house. It started by Leopold Hamburger in the 19th century, who was a son of Jewish immigrants from Portugal. He had a shop in Frankfurt, then was succeeded by his son, and who worked with his cousin Leo Hamburger. Now, both the son and the cousins died in 1929, and then eventually it was taken over by other relatives who had to basically flee the Nazis. And the last auction of the Hamburger house, the auction house, was in 1933, and at that point the auction house came to an end, and luckily both the principals appear to have survived the impending Holocaust. So this coin was actually sold in the Hamburger sale in 1928, when both Leo and his cousin David were still alive, in February 1928, and it was a coin which belonged to this guy. So who's this guy, you ask, and we'll get to that in a minute. And this is the page from the auction catalog where it is listed, and that is the line that describes it. Not a very generous description in contrast to the description I posted earlier, which had a lot more detail. Just talks about Vitellius, it's a denarius, 69 AD, it's a tripod in German, and giving you the condition, and I assume that is the citation of that time. Unfortunately, this particular coin is not pictured in the auction catalog, but the auction catalog was a sale of the collection of Prince Philipp of Saxe-Coburg Gotha, and it was held in Vienna. So who is Prince Philipp? Prince Philipp came from a family who Otto von Bismarck unkindly once referred to as the stud farm of Europe. Why did Bismarck give it that name? Well, the story starts with Francis, Duke of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, who from his second wife produced a lot of kids. His oldest son, Ernst I, married a cousin from another Saxe-Coburg house that eventually the union ended up founding Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Ernst was the father of his younger son. His older son was Ernst II, who succeeded Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. The younger son was the famous Prince Albert. Ernst had a sister, Victoria, who was married once and then in a second marriage married Edward, Duke of Kent, one of the sons of George III, and produced a daughter, Victoria. And Victoria, of course, married Albert, and yes, they were first cousins. Francis had another son, Leopold, who was actually married to Princess Charlotte of Wales, who was the heiress to the throne, who died in childbirth. And had she not died, his history would have been different. He would have basically been the equivalent of Prince Albert in the United Kingdom. But she died in childbirth, the child died, and that resulted in Victoria being born. Leopold later became King of the Belgians after the Belgian Revolution in 1830. And he married Louise of Orleans, who was the daughter of Louis Philippe, King of the French, who himself had come to the throne in 1830 after the revolution there that deposed Charles X. Leopold and Louise had a son who I'm putting him up here for a reason. The infamous Leopold II was responsible for the atrocities in the Congo. Leopold Ernst Victoria had another brother who was Ferdinand. And this is where now you're going to see the theme of the stud farm of Europe picking up. Ferdinand married an Hungarian heiress of the House of Kohari, so he founded the collateral Saxe-Coburg-Gotha line of Saxe-Coburg-Kohari and founded basically the Catholic branch of the house. His oldest son, also named Ferdinand, married Maria II, Queen of Portugal. And the last few Portuguese monarchs of the House of Braganza were actually Coburgs on the male line, even though they kept the last name of Braganza. Ferdinand of Portugal had a younger brother, August of Saxe-Coburg-Kohari, who married Princess Clementine of Orleans, the youngest daughter of Louis Philippe of France, and her sister of Princess Louise, who I mentioned before. Yes, different generations, but it all depends on the age of the people getting married then. Before we get to their oldest son was the Prince Philip, whose coin this was. And just to finish up, to show how the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha line spread across Europe, the youngest son, Ferdinand, to the shock of everybody and to the fury of the Russian Tsar, accepted the throne of Bulgaria. He became Prince of Bulgaria, then Tsar of Bulgaria, and then lost his throne in the aftermath of World War I, but was succeeded by his son, Boris III, who died during World War III after an argument with Hitler, where he had refused to send Bulgarian Jews to the concentration camps and then mysteriously died out after his flight back home. He was succeeded by Simeon II, who was deposed by the communists in 1946. Simeon and the Dalai Lama, the last two surviving heads of state from World War II. King Michael of Romania died a couple of years ago. Simeon actually made it back to Bulgaria after the fall of communism and briefly became prime minister, and did such a bad job at it that his political career is basically over. So let's get back to Prince Philip, and let's get back to the monster Leopold II. Leopold had 3 daughters, and we are going to talk about 2 of them. The first one was Stephanie. She was actually the younger daughter. She married Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria. A very unhappy marriage, which they were not compatible at all, and Rudolf then started having affairs on the side. And the other, her sister Louise married Prince Philipp, another very unhappy marriage, which with infidelity on her side, and eventually the couple separated. And this ties Philip, who, because his father had married a Hungarian heiress, he was part of the Austro-Hungarian court, and he was basically a courtier with his brother-in-law, Rudolf. Rudolf famously, infamously committed suicide with his mistress, a murder-suicide pact, which was a huge scandal, and there have been a bunch of movies about it, one of them starring Omar Sharif and Catherine Deneuve. Philip was actually one of the first ones to find the body, so he was connected to that sad tragedy. And I brought up Mayerling, where Rudolf committed suicide, because it sort of repeated itself with Philip's only son, Prince Leopold Clement, who got into a relationship with a young woman. She wanted to marry him. He gave promises of marriage, but then realized that daddy's not going to be happy, or daddy's going to cut me off without a penny. So he tried to break it off and buy it off, and the woman in question was not happy, and in echoes of Mayerling, she threw a pot of acid in his face and shot herself. And the unfortunate Leopold Clement, who was serving in the Austro-Hungarian army in World War I, died in agony a few months later, which left Philip had only one child left, Dorothea, who married the Duke of Schleswig-Holstein, who lost his crown in the aftermath of World War II. But his heir from the male line was actually one of his other nephews. I didn't mention one of his other brothers who married into the imperial house of Brazil. So the Coburgs really got around in the marriage mart. And part of the reason for this is a lot of European houses wanted to marry people of equal rank, and Germany having a lot of princes. Now, even though a German duchy was not, they were still technically independent for a lot of time. So they were considered independent monarchs. And there were a bunch of Catholic and Protestant princes around, and a lot of these princes were broke. A lot of them produced heirs. So there were a lot of royal houses who found brides and bridegrooms from Germany as a result. Kept Germany very active on the market. So that is the story of this coin. It has a close to, now unfortunately, unlike the other coin that I had shown from the Virgil Brand collection, I've not been able to, I've at least not tried to trace this back further. So this one has a pedigree of almost 100 years, because that's the first sale I know. It's probably older. We don't know when Philip exactly got it. But that is the coin. It's a pretty nice coin, using the picture from the AULUS auction over here again, when the coin was roaming free. Vitellius, I actually did not have a coin of Vitellius, and I've not picked up a coin of Galba or Otho yet. There are some amazing holes in my collection sometimes. One of my morbid themes, as I said, is people who ended badly, and starting with Nero, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, you're fighting a civil war and you lost. And in almost all cases, you're not going to end well. And unfortunately, it means your family is not going to end well. And Vitellius definitely did not end well. But I think it's a cool coin. It's a nice coin, and it's a good one. If you're going to get your first Vitellian coin, that's a good one to start with. So that's it. I hope you liked the video. It's much longer than usual. As I said, I'm trying out this new software. I'm hoping this came out well, and hopefully my internet will cooperate and let me load this up without driving me nuts. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you soon.
I'm sick and tired of living in a van down by the river.